The Grand Galactic Council chamber sparkled like a jewel in space. Its crystal walls stretched so high that even the tallest aliens had to crane their necks to see the top. Today, the chamber was packed with representatives from over 500 advanced civilizations. They had gathered for one purpose: to decide if humans deserved to join their ranks. Ambassador Thomas Gray sat alone at the defendant's platform. He was a simple man with graying hair and kind eyes, wearing a plain black suit that looked out of place among the elaborate robes and biomechanical suits of the alien representatives. His hands were folded calmly in his lap, but anyone watching closely might notice his right thumb slowly rubbing against his left palm, the only sign of his nervousness. The head counselor, a tall being made of shifting light patterns, spoke first. Its voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly into all known languages. We gather today to evaluate Earth's petition for membership in the Galactic Council. Let those who wish to speak step forward. They came forward, one by one. Each species had built empires spanning dozens of stars before they even considered applying for membership. Each had mastered technologies that humans had only dreamed about in their science fiction stories. A blue-skinned alien with 4 arms stood up. "Look at their history," he said, projecting images of Earth's wars into the air. "They fight over invisible lines drawn on their single planet. They cannot even unite their own world. How can they hope to understand galactic politics?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Gray remained silent, watching. Next came a being that looked like a collection of floating crystals. "Their technology is primitive," it chimed. "They still use combustion engines on their planet. Their space vessels can barely reach their own moon without breaking down. They would be like children among giants in this council." More nods, more murmurs. Gray's expression didn't change. A creature that seemed to be made of living metal spoke next. "They destroy their own ecosystem," it said. "They poison their air, their water, their soil. How can we trust them with the responsibility of maintaining order in the galaxy when they cannot maintain their own world?" The criticism continued for hours. Some spoke of humanity's short lifespan, calling them mayflies of the galaxy. Others pointed out their biological weaknesses, their need for constant sleep, their vulnerability to temperature changes, their fragile bones. "They haven't even discovered unified field theory," laughed one being made of pure energy. "My species mastered that before we invented the wheel." The laughter echoed through the chamber. Gray noticed how the sound wasn't so different from human laughter, despite coming from such alien beings. He made a mental note of this as he waited. A small gray creature that looked almost like the classic human description of aliens stood up next. "We have been observing them for centuries," it said. "They spend more time creating entertainment, movies, games, books, than advancing their science. They are dreamers, not doers." The head counselor's light patterns shifted to a deep blue. "Ambassador Gray," it said, "you have heard the concerns of the council. Your species is young. You have only achieved faster than light travel in the last 50 years. You have only unified your planet's governments in the last 20. Many here believe you are not ready for membership. What do you say in humanity's defense?" The chamber fell silent. All eyes, sensory organs, and scanning devices turned toward the simple human in his simple suit. Some expected him to get angry. Others thought he might give up. A few hoped he would provide statistics or technological achievements they hadn't considered. Instead, Thomas Gray slowly stood up. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached his eyes in a way that made several empathic species in the chamber lean forward with sudden interest. "Honored Council," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I would like to tell you a story." The Grand Council chamber was silent as Ambassador Gray began to speak. Many of the alien representatives shifted in their seats, expecting a long list of human achievements, or maybe angry defenses against their criticisms. What they heard instead made them freeze in confusion. "Last week," Gray said, his voice gentle, "in a small school on Earth, a girl named Mary sat down for lunch. She had a sandwich, an apple, and a cookie that her mother had packed for her. Next to her sat a boy who had nothing to eat. Several council members looked at each other. Was this human actually telling a children's story in the most important political chamber in the galaxy? Gray continued, his eyes moving from one alien face to another. The boy didn't say anything. He just stared at his empty desk. Mary looked at her lunch, then at the boy. Without saying a word, she split her sandwich in half and gave it to him. She divided her apple and shared her cookie too. "What is the point of this?" interrupted the metal being who had spoken earlier. "We are discussing galactic politics, not children's mealtimes." Gray smiled. "The point, honored representative, is that no one told Mary to share her food. No law required it. No teacher supervised it. No reward was offered. She saw another being in need and chose to help. This is humanity." The head counselor's light patterns shifted to a curious yellow. "Continue," it said. "You speak of our primitive technology," Gray said, his voice growing stronger. "Let me tell you about Jack, a firefighter. When a building catches fire, he runs into it while others run out. Last month, he climbed 15 floors in a burning building to save a cat. Not a person. A cat. A small animal that some would consider unimportant. He risked his life because he believed that life, any life, was worth saving." The crystal being chimed softly. "But these are isolated incidents." "Are they?" Gray pulled out a small device and projected images into the air, just as the aliens had done with Earth's wars. But these images were different. They showed people forming human chains to rescue others from floods. They showed crowds of strangers lifting a car to free a trapped child. They showed scientists working through nights to cure diseases that didn't even affect their own countries. "You say we're primitive because we haven't mastered unified field theory," Gray continued. "But tell me, in all your advanced civilizations, how many of you have blood donation centers? How many of your people voluntarily give parts of themselves to save complete strangers?" The chamber grew quieter still. The energy being's glow dimmed slightly. "You mock our entertainment, our stories, our dreams," Gray said, walking slowly around his platform. "But every story we tell, every game we create, every song we sing, they all carry the same messages: hope, courage, sacrifice, love. We dream not just of flying among the stars, but of being better than we are, of helping others, of making the universe a little bit kinder." He paused, looking at the head counselor. "You say we're not ready for membership because we haven't achieved certain technological benchmarks. I say we're ready precisely because we haven't let our technology define our worth. We measure ourselves not by the height of our buildings, but by the depth of our compassion." The blue-skinned alien who had first criticized humanity stood up. "But what about your wars? Your conflicts?" Gray nodded sadly. "Yes, we fight. Yes, we make mistakes. But here's what makes humans special. We keep trying to be better. That girl, Mary. She shared her lunch even though just the day before someone had taken her favorite pencil without asking. She chose to be kind despite experiencing unkindness. That's humanity's true power, not our ability to build machines, but our choice to be better than our worst instincts." As Gray finished speaking, a strange sound filled the chamber. The aliens were whispering among themselves, but it wasn't the dismissive murmuring from before. Something in their tone had changed. The head counselor's patterns shifted to a deep purple, a color it rarely displayed. "Ambassador Gray," it said, "you mentioned you had a story to tell us. When does this story begin?" Gray's eyes twinkled. "Oh," he said softly, "I'm just getting started." Ambassador Gray took a deep breath before continuing. His next words would need to strike at the heart of what made humanity different. He touched a small photo in his pocket, his reminder of home, and began again. "Let me tell you about Mike, a cave diver," he said. "Last year, when 12 children got trapped in a flooded cave system, Mike and his team spent 18 days underwater in dark, narrow tunnels. They didn't know these children. They didn't speak their language. They weren't paid. They came from across the world simply because children needed help. The crystal being chimed softly, but surely they sought recognition, fame. Gray shook his head. Many of them refused to give their names to the media. They said they were just doing what anyone would do. He paused. But that's the thing. In human society, this is normal. We expect people to help others. We're surprised when they don't. The metal being shifted, its surface rippling. You speak of individual acts. What about your institutions? Your governments? Ah. Gray smiled. Let me tell you about something we call public libraries. Buildings full of knowledge, open to everyone, completely free. Or public parks, spaces of nature preserved in our cities, where anyone can walk, rest, or play, regardless of their status or wealth. He projected new images into the air. Libraries filled with children reading. Parks where people of all ages gathered. Soup kitchens serving hot meals to the hungry. You mentioned our primitive medical technology. Gray continued. Did you know we have doctors who travel to the poorest parts of our world, using their skills to help those who can't pay? We have researchers who spend their entire lives searching for cures to rare diseases that affect only a handful of people. The energy being glowed brighter. But these actions are inefficient. They don't maximize resources. Exactly. Gray's voice rose with passion. That's what makes them remarkable. We choose to be inefficient if it means helping others. We choose to sacrifice personal gain for the greater good. He walked to the center of the platform. You say we're primitive because we still have homeless people. But for every homeless person, there are volunteers who serve meals, donate clothes, and work to build shelters. You point to our environmental problems, but have you seen our teenagers? They plant trees that won't grow tall until after they're dead. They clean beaches they've never visited. They fight for a future they won't live to see. The chamber was completely still now. Even the floating crystals had stopped their usual gentle tinkling. Let me tell you about Robert, a bus driver, Gray said softly. Every winter morning, he arrives at work an hour early to warm up the bus so his passengers won't be cold. No one asked him to do this. No one pays him extra. He does it because he thinks about other people's comfort. The head counselor's light patterns shifted rapidly. These stories, they are verified. Every single one. Gray nodded. And I have thousands more. The teacher who buys school supplies with her own money. The neighbor who mows an elderly couple's lawn without being asked. The child who sets up a lemonade stand to raise money for sick pets at the animal shelter. The blue-skinned alien leaned forward. But what do these small acts matter in the face of galactic politics? Gray's eyes met the aliens, all four of them. Everything that matters in the galaxy begins with small acts. You've mastered faster than light travel, yes. But have you mastered being kind when no one is watching? You've built artificial worlds, but have you built communities where people help each other simply because they can? A low murmur spread through the chamber. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was something else, something that sounded almost like wonder. We may be young, Gray said. We may be technologically behind. But every day, millions of humans choose to be kind when they could be cruel, generous when they could be selfish, hopeful when they could be cynical. That's not weakness. That's not primitive. That's power. The head counselor's color had shifted to a deep gold, a sign of profound thought. Continue, Ambassador Gray, it said. We are beginning to understand. Just as the chamber's mood began to shift in humanity's favor, a new figure rose from the highest tier of seats. The representative of the Stellar Imperium stood tall, its perfectly geometric body catching the light. The Imperials were known throughout the galaxy as beings of pure logic, and their words carried enormous weight in the council. Enough of these emotional appeals, the Imperial said, its voice mathematically precise. I will show you the true nature of humanity. It raised its crystalline arm, and the chamber filled with new holograms. Gray's heart sank as he recognized the scenes. Wars, genocide, pollution, cruelty. The worst moments of human history played out around him in vivid detail. "Here are your humans," the Imperial continued. "In the last century alone, they killed millions of their own kind. They invented weapons that could destroy entire cities. They drove thousands of species to extinction. These are not stories. These are facts. Numbers. Data." The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy. Many of the council members who had been swayed by Gray's stories now looked uncertain. The Imperial turned its faceted head toward Gray. "You speak of a child sharing lunch. I show you children starving. You speak of firefighters saving lives. I show you soldiers taking them. You speak of kindness. I show you reality." Gray stood quietly for a moment, looking at the terrible images floating around him. Then he did something that surprised the council. He nodded. "You're right," he said simply. The Imperial's geometric form flickered in surprise. It had expected denial or defense. "Everything you show us is true," Gray continued. "We have done all these horrible things. We continue to do some of them. We are capable of terrible cruelty." He walked through a hologram of a bombed city, his face sad but determined. "But that's exactly what makes our kindness so important." "Explain," demanded the Imperial. "Every single act of kindness I described happened in this same world you show us. That girl shared her lunch in a city where poverty exists. That firefighter risked his life in a world where people set fires. Those doctors helped strangers in a world where others would walk past." Gray's voice grew stronger. "We choose to be kind despite knowing cruelty. We choose to be generous despite knowing greed. We choose to help others despite knowing we might get nothing in return." He turned to face the Imperial directly. "Your species evolved beyond emotion, beyond conflict. You never feel the urge to be cruel or selfish. That's not enlightenment, that's programming. Humans wake up every day with the capacity for both good and evil, and every day, billions of us choose good." The Imperial's perfect geometry seemed to waver slightly. "But the data shows that we're flawed." Gray finished. "Of course we are. But show me your data on how many humans help strangers every day. Show me your statistics on random acts of kindness. Show me your calculations on the value of a child deciding to be nice to someone who was mean to them." The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even the energy beings had stopped their usual pulsing. "You can't measure those things, can you?" Gray asked softly. "You can count our wars, but not our acts of peace. You can measure our weapons, but not our mercy. You can calculate our violence, but not our love." He gestured at the holograms still showing humanity's worst moments. "Yes, this is part of who we are. But it's not all we are. And the fact that we can be better, that we regularly choose to be better, that's what makes us ready for the galaxy." The Imperial stood motionless, its logical processes seemingly caught in an unexpected loop. Finally, it spoke again, but its mathematically perfect voice held a new tone, something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "This requires further analysis," it said. As the Imperial representative sat down, still processing Gray's response, something unexpected happened. A small green-skinned alien stood up from the lower seats. This species was known as maintenance workers across the galaxy, rarely speaking in council meetings. I have seen humans," the green alien said, its voice trembling. "I clean the spaceports where their ships dock. They are the only ones who learn our names, who ask how we are, who say thank you." Before anyone could respond, another representative stood up. This one looked like a tall plant with glowing leaves. "When the great drought hit our colony worlds, humans were the first to send water ships. They didn't even ask for payment. They said everyone deserves to drink." More beings began to stand, one after another. They built playgrounds in their space stations, set a floating cloud of purple gas, not just for their children, for all children. My younglings had never known play before meeting humans. Their doctors treated my sick without asking what species I was, rumbled a giant rock-like being. They said all life deserves care. They make art about us, shined in a creature made of pure sound waves. Not to mock, but to understand. They try to see beauty in all forms of life. The head counselor's light patterns shifted rapidly, trying to maintain order as more and more representatives wanted to speak. Gray stood quietly, watching as the truth about humanity spread through the chamber like ripples in a pond. A reptilian being with scales that changed color with emotion turned bright gold, their color of truth. When we had that terrible accident at our mining colony, humans were not the most advanced rescuers who came, but they were the only ones who stayed after the rescue was over. They helped rebuild homes. They taught our children games to help them forget their fear. They shared their food even though they had barely enough for themselves. The blue-skinned alien who had first criticized humanity stood again. But this time, its tone was different. I opposed humans joining the council because I thought they were too primitive. But now I understand. They do something none of us learned in all our millions of years of advancement. They grow. They change. They choose to be better. The energy being pulsed thoughtfully. Perhaps we have been measuring advancement wrong all this time. We counted ships, weapons, technological achievements. Should we have been counting acts of kindness instead? Even the imperial representative stirred. Our calculations never included variables for compassion, for choice, for the power of deciding to help without logical benefit. Gray finally spoke again, his voice gentle. That's because you can't calculate the true impact of kindness. When that girl shared her lunch, she didn't just feed one hungry child. She taught everyone who saw it about sharing. The child who received the food might grow up to help others the same way. The ripples of one kind act can cross generations. The chamber erupted in a chorus of voices, but they weren't arguing anymore. They were sharing stories. 1,000 different species, each remembering moments when humans had surprised them with unexpected kindness. The head counselor's colors shifted to brilliant white, a sign of revelation. Ambassador Gray, it said, you have shown us something we had forgotten in our rush to advance. You have reminded us that true civilization is not measured by the height of our buildings, but by the height of our hearts. Gray finished quietly. That's what humanity has been trying to learn all along. The chamber fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was the silence of a galaxy beginning to change its mind. Ambassador Gray watched as the council chamber buzzed with conversation. Species that had never spoken to each other were sharing stories about humans. But he wasn't finished yet. He had saved his most important message for last. Honored Council, he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Before you vote, there's one more thing you need to understand about humanity. The chamber grew quiet again. The head counselor's lights dimmed to a listening blue. Speak, Ambassador. Gray walked to the center of the platform. You all came here today ready to judge humanity, to measure us against your standards, to decide if we were worthy. He paused, looking around the vast chamber. But not one of you asked why we wanted to join. The aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You assumed we wanted your technology, your knowledge, your power. Gray smiled sadly. But that's not why Earth sent me here today. The imperial representative's geometric form twisted slightly. Then why did you come? We came because we looked at the galaxy and saw how lonely it was. Gray's words echoed in the silence. We saw advanced civilizations that never talked to each other except for trade. We saw species with amazing powers who never used them to help others. We saw a galaxy full of life, but empty of connection. He turned slowly, meeting the eyes, sensors, and scanning beams of every species. You call us primitive because we still have poverty, but at least we try to end it. You mock us for our emotions, but at least we can feel for others. You dismiss our conflicts, but at least we know we need to do better. The energy beings glow-dimmed. Are you suggesting we are the primitive ones? No, Gray said gently. I'm suggesting that advancement isn't a straight line. You've climbed so high in some ways that you've forgotten what it means to reach down and help others up. He touched his pocket where the photo was. Every human child knows the story of the Good Samaritan, a person who helps a stranger in need. We teach our children to be kind before we teach them to read. We value compassion above computation, mercy above might. The head counselor's patterns shifted to deep purple. And you believe this makes you worthy of the council? No, Gray said again, surprising everyone. I believe it makes us necessary to the council. A murmur ran through the chamber. Look around you, Gray continued. When was the last time species in this chamber helped each other without a treaty? When did you last build something just to make others happy? When did you last change your ways because you saw a better path? The chamber was completely still now. Many representatives were looking at their neighbors as if seeing them for the first time. Humanity doesn't want to join the council to gain power, Gray said. We want to join to share what we know about connecting hearts, about choosing kindness, about growing better together. He smiled, and this time there was a brightness in his eyes that made even the energy beings lean forward. You've spent millennia learning how to reach the stars. Perhaps it's time to learn how to reach each other. The crystal being chimed softly, and humans could teach us this. We could try. Gray nodded. That's another thing about humans. We never stop trying to help, even when the task seems impossible. The head counselor's colors suddenly blazed like a rainbow. In all the history of the council, no species has ever approached membership this way. Its pattern swirled faster. Perhaps that is exactly why we need you. Gray stood straight, his voice firm but kind. The question isn't whether humanity is ready for the council. The question is the council ready for humanity? The voting took less than an hour, the fastest decision in council history. When the head counselor announced the results, its light patterns were so bright that some representatives had to shield their sensors. By an overwhelming majority, it declared, Earth is not only accepted into the Galactic Council. It paused, its colors shifting to a new pattern never seen before in the chamber. We also propose creating a new position. Teachers of compassion. Humanity will help guide us all toward a better way of living together. The chamber erupted in something that had never happened before. Applause. Species that had no hands found ways to make appreciative sounds. Energy beings pulsed in harmony. Crystal entities chimed in joy. The imperial representative stood, its geometric form now showing subtle curves, a significant change for their species. We request to be humanity's first students, it said. Our logic is perfect, but we see now that logic alone is not enough. We too wish to learn, said the blue-skinned alien. Our empire has 1,000 worlds, but not one shelter for the homeless. This must change. More species stood, each asking to learn from humanity. The head counselor had to wave its light appendages for quiet. Ambassador Gray, it said, will humanity accept this responsibility? Gray reached into his pocket and finally took out the photo he'd been touching throughout the session. He held it up for all to see. It showed a small human child offering half a cookie to an alien child in a refugee camp. We already have, he said simply. The council session ended differently than any before it. Instead of formal dismissal, representatives began walking down to Gray's platform, wanting to talk, to share stories, to learn. Species that had never spoken to each other were making plans to work together on charitable projects. 3 days later, Gray's ship approached Earth. As he looked down at his home planet, he thought about how much had changed. The Council's ships now orbited Earth not to judge but to learn. Their first request: to understand how to set up something they never had before. Soup kitchens for the poor of all species. When his ship landed, Gray expected the usual political welcome committee. Instead, he found something that made his eyes water. Hundreds of children from the local schools stood waiting, each holding half of their lunch to share with the alien representatives who had come to Earth. At the front of the crowd stood a small girl with a chocolate chip cookie in her hand. She broke it carefully in half and walked up to Gray. "Welcome home, Mr. Ambassador," she said, offering him half of her cookie. Would you like to share? Gray knelt down to accept the cookie, and as he did, he saw the alien representatives watching with fascination. They were learning their first lesson about humanity, that great changes can start with the smallest acts of kindness. You know, Gray said to the girl, but loud enough for everyone to hear, someone once asked me what makes humans special. I think you just showed them better than all my speeches. Behind them, the head counselor's lights glowed warm and bright. Perhaps, it said softly, we have all been looking up at the stars for so long that we forgot to look into each other's hearts. The girl looked at the glowing alien curiously. Would you like half of my half? She asked, breaking her portion of the cookie again. As the head counselor accepted the tiny piece of cookie with all the gravity of a major diplomatic ceremony, Gray smiled. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had hoped for all along. Because sometimes the biggest changes in the universe don't come from grand technological achievements or mighty displays of power. Sometimes they come from a simple choice, made over and over again. The choice to be kind, to share, to care. Even if it's just half a cookie at a time.